So, Saturday, 3rd of July, 2021. Day after Wanpra. So this is when the day after Wanpra, and then followed by Saturday night, we call that double whammy. Normally we would have this day off, but it was the half moon, so it's the optional all-night vigil. Some people stayed up part of the night, some people stayed up longer, say more of the night. And the weather is kind of warm, but it's not unbearable. This is like element contemplation is coming up for me during the meditation. So one of the ways we do body mindfulness, or the first foundation of mindfulness, is the element contemplation of the four elements of earth, water, fire, and air. And then these four together constitute what's just called the great element, or the Mahabhuta, or Bhuta, B-H-U-T-A. The Bhuta Dhatu is the great element. So Longpar Liam would talk about this quite a bit. And we can think about the elements in many different ways, and contemplating the elements, thinking about the elements, can help us to do things like endure heat and cold better. The Buddha taught that those who do Kayagata Anusati, those who do the first foundation of mindfulness, or who have mindfulness of the body, one of the benefits of that is being able to endure heat and cold, wind, mosquitoes, gadflies, burning and creeping things. We're able to endure those things better if we have mindfulness, because when we have mindfulness, there's that sense of attention and awareness of the body. So when we have the awareness of the body, then we're more in the awareness, so trusting in being the awareness itself. And then there's a stepping back from the sensations of the body. You're noticing things, but there's less of that attraction and aversion toward the body. So if it's hot outside, we might at a certain point, we might be able to endure it a little bit, and then at a certain point we'll cave in and, I can't take it anymore. Gotta go get cool. Or if it's too cold, we might be able to endure it for a little bit and then can't take it anymore. But then it's just with the mindfulness of the body, it's like expanding the boundaries of our comfort zone to be a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, and then we can be a little bit more content. When we push the boundaries of the comfort zone, then we can be a little bit more content with things and be a little bit more at ease with all these things. I remember listening to a recording, a Longpar Band talk, and he was talking about just contentment and developing equanimity, and it was a talk given during the hot season in Thailand, and you could hear all these flies in the recording. They're buzzing around him. It's very, very hot, and there was a lot of flies around, so the talk was being given outside somewhere. And I just thought, like, oh, when is he going to stop talking and have to, like, when is he going to get fed up with these flies that are buzzing around him? And he was just, like, kept talking very kind of like, yeah, it's hot out right now, and, there's flies, and it's not a problem. He's just very calm. Thought, wow, that's really impressive. So that's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, with the practice. That we can talk a lot about. We can talk a lot about the teachings, but then the experiential practice. This is where we actually put it into practice, where we develop that patient endurance. And one of the most common pieces of advice in Thailand is just oton, just endure, just keep enduring. there is a limit. It doesn't mean we torture ourselves. It doesn't mean we have to bring pain upon ourselves or bring some sort of discomfort to ourselves. But then if there is discomfort, if we can't get away from it, then to learn how to be content with it and endure it. Because suffering over it or making a problem out of it doesn't solve the situation, or getting worried about it. It ends up not helping. It ends up compounding. It ends up compounding the problem. Or even if we're tired on the day after Wanpra, we could become more irritable, or mindfulness can be a little bit more weak because we're tired. That's one of the great things about the Lunar Observance Day, and how Luang Cha put in place that staying up in the meditation, and then the next day, really the test is the next day. Is how do you do the next day? So that's usually when the mind is mindfulness is a little bit weaker, and then the irritation can come up easier. Conflicts can happen on the day after Wanpra. They used to have robe washing day at Wapananachat on the day after Wanpra, and there were so many conflicts that they had to change it to the day before Wanpra. So it was becoming too common. So if it gets too difficult, we do have to make a change. So we don't want it to be too difficult. If it's too difficult, then everybody will just run away. So we don't want the practice to be too difficult, but we want it right at that edge. So we're pushing that edge. We're pushing that edge all the time, and that's the edge of bhavana. That's the edge of development of the practice. And we can apply this to anything. Meditation's not going well. We think, my mind's not peaceful, meditation's not going well. But we can endure that as well. And we can learn how to be okay with that as well. It's one of the paradoxes of meditation, is that being okay with a unpeaceful meditation makes the mind more peaceful. So it's really just training ourselves to do that, rather than meditation's not peaceful and we get more and more frustrated, and then we can suffer a lot over it. And then that frustration, it's a negative feedback loop, or a downward spiral. The frustration itself makes the mind less peaceful, and then we get more frustrated. We get even more frustrated because the mind's even less peaceful. And then it can go on like that. So we try to put a spike or a wrench into that negative feedback loop, and then try to make it into a positive feedback loop where we're okay with a meditation that's not peaceful. We're okay. The body and the mind aren't peaceful. There might be anxiety or some sort of tension in the body and in the mind. They're not peaceful, but then we're okay with it. We're not making a problem out of it. Then the mind starts to settle a bit, starts to get a bit more content. It's a bit more okay with it. And because of that, putting that mental factor in place of being okay with a meditation that's not good, then we feel a bit more peaceful. And then say, that's okay, and then we can be okay with that as well. Or it can go to the other way. Sometimes we feel like if we're not suffering, we're not making progress. So we can be attached to our suffering, or identified with our suffering, or always focusing on negative things. We might watch the news and then focus just on negative things, on these negative things happening in the world, based on whatever we read. So that's like the way we're using our eye base and our ear base. How are we using our eye base and our ear base? And what are we taking in? And whatever we take in, we're going to put that back out. We're going to talk about it with people. We might read a headline and repeat it to our friend, spouse, whatever. You won't believe, and get dissatisfied again, suffer, make a problem out of it. So get agitated. And rarely is it positive. So what we take in, we're going to put back out. So that's just kind of the way it works. So we want to make the mind very, very positive and very, very bright. So it's kind of like cleaning house. So we take stock of what we're putting into the mind, how we're using our sense bases. And also how we're using our sense bases, that's where we start to contemplate what's directing our attention. So the attention can be directed to, say, a meditation object, but then when we're meditating, then the attention gets directed here and there in terms of the thoughts and what's directing that attention. So that's the defilements. That's what we're looking at. And those are very hidden and hard to see. And that's what's directing the attention. So the akusala or the kusala, these two different things are directing the attention. If the mind is unwholesome, it's akusala. The attention is then being directed by the unwholesome, and it might go to an unwholesome object, which ends up increasing our suffering. And then if the mind is kusala, or wholesome, and then the awareness gets directed in a more wholesome way to, say, contentment or a sense of ease or consciously calming the body. So that would be more kusala, more of a wholesome object. Or something like spreading goodwill to ourselves, like metta, the metta kammatthana, spreading goodwill to ourselves and others. So that would be like the kusala chitta. The mind is wholesome, but it's always going back and forth like this. And the unwholesome and the wholesome, in any given moment, they can't exist together. It's like unwholesome was one side of the hand, and then you flip it over, and that's the wholesome. So in any given moment, they're not together. So it's trying to curb the mind, curb the momentum to make it more and more wholesome. And that's the whole path. That's the practice. That's sila samadhi panya. Is to try to get the mind to be more and more wholesome and relinquishing the unwholesome. And when the Buddha talks about wholesome and unwholesome, he talks about kusala and akusala. The definition of akusala would be anything that results in suffering and dissatisfaction. And kusala would be anything that results in happiness. So akusala is leading to dukkha, and kusala is leading to sukha and higher. So this different... And so when the Buddha said something's unwholesome, it's unwholesome because it leads to suffering. And when something's wholesome, it's wholesome because it leads to happiness. So it's not, the Buddha's not saying like, do this because it's good and just listen to me and do what I say because I said so. He said, if you want more and more ease and happiness, this is what you do. And if you want, well, nobody really wants more suffering, but if you choose suffering or choose that path, then you this is what you do, and then that causes suffering. So he's just laying it out there. And it's really, the Buddha's saying, well, it's up to you. He's not going to coerce us to have more ease and well-being or be happy. But he's kind of like, well, it's good, it's better, so, it's for your own benefit. These teachings are put out there, but then it's up to each individual to do it for themselves. And then there's that, like, it can be done. Like the Buddha saying, like, if it wasn't possible, then he wouldn't teach these things. But because it's possible to put them into practice, it's possible to get the results from the practice, then he teaches these things. So he's putting it out there saying it can be done. He's not giving us some sort of impossible task. And then he's saying it's worth it if you do it. It's worth it if you do the practice. So he's saying even if there's these really strong analogies in the suttas, like the analogy of the spears, if you were to be pierced by a spear in the morning and the afternoon and the evening, being pierced by 100 spears, and somehow not dying, somehow they miss all of your internal organs and inflict immense pain, but you don't die. So, and then that gets done to you every day for 100 years. And if by that suffering you would attain the fruit of stream-entry, I say it would be worth it. And then the Buddha goes on to say, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to endure that kind of suffering. So how much more so should we convince ourselves or give ourselves the impetus to practice. And why would it be worth it, all those being pierced by all those spears? Why would putting up with that amount of pain, why would that be worth it if it led to the fruit of stream entry? It's because the suffering that's left for someone who's attained to stream entry is like a speck of dirt on your fingernail, and the suffering left for someone who hasn't attained stream entry is like the whole earth. The Buddha's talking in chronological terms here. So the suffering, say a stream entry according to the suttas, according to the text and the tradition, no more than 7 more lifetimes before reaching arhatship, and the lower realms are closed off. The animal realm, the ghost realm, the hell realms are closed to them. So in that sense, the suffering is like the bit of dirt on the fingernail, and then if one didn't attain the fruit of stream entry, then the future, on into the future, it's unknown. So that it's like a whole earth of suffering awaiting. So the Buddha's given these analogies to try to convince us that it's worth it. It's worth it to practice. So we hear these things, and it's easy for doubt to come up about these things, and that's natural, that's fine, and doubt is just doubt. So if we have a lot of doubt, it's also helpful to remember these examples, the Krupa Ajahns, the Ajahns who have visited Abhayagiri in the past. I was talking with somebody in Thailand yesterday, and they were asking about Longpo Plian visit when he visited here in 2007. They were asking about that, and Longpo Plian was here for 2 weeks in 2007, and 2007 was actually a very special year. It was Longpo Plian was here, Bhikkhu Bodhi, Bhante Gunaratana, Ajahn Jeff visited for a week, and so we had a lot of different Ajahns. Ajahn Tui's second monk, who they call Tan Pu Don, he visited here. So there's a lot of Krupa Ajahns visiting in 2007. It's a very special year. And just remembering some of the interactions we had with Longpo Plian. I remember he gave a talk up at the ordination platform. We were doing morning and evening meditations up at the ordination platform outside at the time, and then Longpo Plian gave a talk after evening puja up on the platform. Really nice setting up there. And then I remember we took Longpo Plian up to the ridge to show him the boundary of the monastery and give him the full tour of the monastery. And one thing that was kind of touching, because I remember Debbie was with us when we went up there, and it would have been Ajahn Pasano, Ajahn Amaro, and a few others going up there with Longpo Plian. And Longpo Plian was looking down over you can see the whole monastery from the ridge top. And he was kind of like, so where's the boundary of our monastery? So he included himself in the monastery. It was just very nice, very kind of subtle, but very lovely. And so we have these examples of these Ajahns who help to look after us. Or of course, Longpo Liam with all of his different visits here, and then his example. So when we have doubt about the possibility of path and fruit and the efficacy of the Buddhist practice, then we have these examples to look at, and we say, well, there's something there. There's definitely something there. They've practiced, and they can attest to these things, and so we put our trust in that. That's refuge in Sangha as well. So we have these examples from the past that can attest to the reality of the path. Ajahn Chah, he even said himself that he tried so many different ways of practice, and it was hard for him to find teachers. For Longpo Chah, he spent the first years of his monastic life in a village temple in Bangor, and he was just doing what the normal village monks would do before he found out about these forest monks, and then was inspired to leave and practice and seek out these forest monks and actually become a Tudong monk. And he says there was one day when he threw away his wallet. So it's just normal for most monks in the world to use money, and he wanted to become a Dutanga Kamatana bhikkhu, and so he threw away his wallet and confessed those offenses and actually started seeking. And one event kind of moved him in this way is that Ajahn Sao, so Ajahn Mun's teacher, Ajahn Sao came through, and Ajahn Chah's father was a student of Ajahn Sao, and so Ajahn Chah's father, he remembers Ajahn Chah's father talking with Ajahn Sao, and he said it was so different. Like normally at the village temple, when you get a teaching, they would read from a text or do like a ceremony. But he said what was striking about Ajahn Sao is it was just like talking. It was just like the teaching was more just like talking, and it was very clear it was from the heart. And Ajahn Sao was a man of few words, a bhikkhu of few words. So he would just give very, very brief teachings. And the way Ajahn Sao would teach somebody would go to Ajahn Sao and request teachings, and he would say, okay, sit down with your legs crossed, and when you're breathing in, mentally recite But. When you're breathing out, mentally recite To. And then he would that's all he would say. He wouldn't give much explanation. He'd say, okay, now just go practice. And if something happens, you can come ask me about it. So he'd just say, okay, he wouldn't go out of his way to say a lot of things. He'd say, okay, well, if something happens or the mind, you develop a sense of ease and well-being, come and talk to me, and we can talk about it, and we'll go from there. So that's how Ajahn Sao would teach people. So that kind of thing really affected Ajahn Chah when he was a junior monk, and inspired him it kindled that faith in him to want to actually go and seek out these Kruba Ajahns. And so we don't know that much. Even in his biography, he didn't talk very much about his early years where he was a Tudong monk, but we can ascertain a few things that he practiced with some of the disciples of Ajahn Mun. So he probably spent Pansa with Ajahn Fun, one Vasa, it's possible, although he doesn't talk about it, but he always had this. We can ascertain that from the fact that when Ajahn Fun passed away, then Ajahn Chah went to the funeral with 99 monks from Wat Pah Pong and made a point of really going out of his way to pay the last respects to Ajahn Fun when he passed away. And so he had a great respect for Ajahn Fun. And also, of course, as we know, he met up with Ajahn Mun for 3 days, and that was a very pivotal time in his practice. And he took those teachings, and that really transformed his practice, those teachings that Ajahn Mun gave him. And one of those teachings was Ajahn Chah trying to figure out how to practice with the Vinaya and all of the precepts. And also there was these commentaries, and back then it wasn't so clear. You had to figure out the Pali, and there wasn't really good translations into Thai. And he would carry around these texts with him on Tudong. So he was they're quite heavy. And so he was on Tudong, but also studying like the Pubasika Wanana, which is this text it's written in antiquated Thai. And even now it takes like a scholar to figure out, to translate it accurately. And so he was studying the Pubasika and also trying to figure out the Vinaya and all the rules, how to practice with all of them. And he asked Ajahn Mun, like, there's all these rules, some of them even seem to contradict each other sometimes. And how do you practice with these rules? It seems impossible to remember them all and actually practice them all perfectly. And Ajahn Mun answered by saying, you just have to have two things. You just have to have Hiri and Ottappa, which are the protectors of the world, the Lokapalas. We translate it usually as shame and fear of wrongdoing, but it can also be a sense of conscience, having a sense of conscience and integrity. And so that was a very important teaching for him. And also this teaching that the Dhamma, or that the heart is one thing and the khandhas are another, and that although you get into kind of these semantical problems where you don't want to say that there's some eternal self outside of the five khandhas, but that looking straight at the heart and seeing that the khandhas follow the truth of anicca, dukkha, anatta, but then the heart is in a different category or a different class. Yeah. So that's what there's this phrase Ajahn Mun liked to use, which is titi bhutang. It's like the heart that stands firm in and of itself. So, but this is the Forest Dhamma, the teachings of the Kruba Ajahns, where they're talking from experience. So those teachings were very pivotal for Ajahn Chah, and he was able to take them and practice with them. But he also practiced with other not very well-known Ajahns who were disciples of Ajahn Mun. I believe one was named Ajahn Wong, and he was the one who was living on top of a mountain with a novice, and the one who was Ajahn Chah then was having this issue with his meditation where it was like a bridge that he couldn't cross. He said in his meditation, it was as if he came to a bridge, but he could only go halfway and he couldn't cross all the way over the bridge. And then he hears about this really impressive Ajahn who's living on the top of a mountain, and goes up there to pay respects to him. And it's this Ajahn Wong. And he tells his meditation problem to Ajahn Wong, and Ajahn Wong replies by saying, "Oh yeah, you've reached what we call the edge of perception, and what you have to do there is just you keep practicing with that, keep going to that point and staying there, and it'll break up at some point." And then Ajahn Chah, of course, being able to put those teachings into practice and saying how helpful it is to have these teachers and these examples. And I feel like now, of course, like we're just trying to say here at Abhayagiri, we're just trying to bumble along and kind of practice in any way we can. We're not, at that level of advancement in terms of the meditation, but it's good to recollect those things and that kind of possibility. And it doesn't mean we can't get there eventually if we keep practicing. Like I heard one time somebody said like oh, the Ajahn Chah group and the Westerners, they're like the elite kind of these like Green Beret meditators, and I said no, I don't think we're that. I think of us more like the Mighty Ducks. Like we're kind of like a ad hoc group, kind of like trying, but we still have that. We can still train, and we might have, if we learn how to work together and we practice, we might have a chance at the trophy or whatever. So the trophy of the Dhamma, the trophy of peace and ease and well-being that we're seeking. So we follow the Vinaya, we do all these, we go to the morning and evening pujas, and we do these late night meditation vigils just so that we can and do all this hard practice just so we can have a sense of ease and well-being in the heart. And the Kruba Ajahns, they're all about the heart. Everything is the heart. Like the Dhamma's in the heart, the Kilesa are in the heart, everything's the heart. The path is in the heart, the Mara is in the heart. So and then the purification of the heart is where it comes back to that kusala and akusala. So seeing how the attention is being directed, trying to see on a very deep level. One thing that's good to understand about when the Buddha talks about like the defilements or the asava as well, he talks about greed, hatred, and delusion. And we might have thoughts, say like thoughts of greed or thoughts of anger, and we think like, those are, I have so much defilement. But then we have to back up one level, because the real defilement is the way we react to those thoughts. So those thoughts coming up, those are old karma. We're reaping the results of old karma, the things that have been put in place already. But the way we react in the present is the defilement. So if we have a thought of anger, and we get angry at that thought of anger, or we try to push away or destroy it, then that's the defilement. That's the aversion. Or if we have like something where the mind gets attached or gloms onto it, then that's the greed. That's the attraction. So it's happening in the present, and then that creates the kama for the vipaka. So the thoughts we're experiencing, that's what we call vipaka, and then the kama in the present is like how we're habitually reacting to that vipaka. So it's a good kind of distinction to make, and to not get too hard on ourselves if the mind is going wild. Ajahn Mun himself said his own mind was wild and went all over the place, and he had to really kind of rein it in and learn how to not give power to the wild mind. And that comes from developing that sense of contentment and just letting things be as they are, letting it settle. So anyway, I don't want to go on for too long on the day after Wanprah, but those are a few thoughts for this evening, and wish everybody well. There's a lot of sincere people here today, so may you all benefit from the practice. I'll leave it there.